Hey, welcome back to talking about MASH. Well, Maya. But we're on the MASH series, and this one is where we start to deviate from the kind of normalcy here even further. So we're gonna go over, I believe we're gonna go over some placer node shenanigans. We're gonna go over some Arnold curve collection stuff, and we're going to, on that same vein of Arnold stuff, I'm gonna show you how to use the instance server idea of mesh networks to duplicate curves, which will lead to some interesting effects. I hope. I've really enjoyed working with this particular aspect quite a bit. So, starting off, we're going to go ahead and create a basic sphere. We're immediately hide that and go to our top view, where we will create. Oh gosh, top view, where we're going to create an EP curve. Holding down X to quickly create the shape that I'm looking for. We'll put this bad boy back into curve mode or in curve point mode. So now we have this back on the origin point. Smash our way back over to the perspective mode. And we're just going to rotate this guy up to an upright position. So he's no longer drunk on the floor. He's now upright. We have frozen his uh, transformations. And we're going to move on to shrinking him since the sphere isn't all that large. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and just make the sphere substantially larger. And we're going to increase the divisions to support our next operation. Bueno. So if we go to 4 and we select our curve, we can see it's hidden. So if we make it visible again, we can shrink it down to about that large, which is kind of nicely proportional. And let's go ahead and make a mesh network. Make sure we're in the instancer when we do it. This is going to be hair mash. You can see it instantly gives us our distribution as normal, which we will set to 0. Let's see. I think we are going to avoid. We're just going to have 0 here for the number of created objects. And instead, we're going to go straight into the placer node, which is really, I think, underutilized by me. I'm going to turn my grid. I have to go by the gizmo here. So what this allows you to do is to paint on the objects that are from your instancer. So if we increase the brush radius, you can see it starts to place some curves. So let's just go ahead and start placing some up here. I think I'm going to make this brush size a lot bigger, just to speed this process along. I'm not sure what this brush spacing does, but yep, it densifies things a lot. So we're just going to kind of smash our way around here. The cool thing about the placer node is that it's sort of separate from everything else in your mesh network, like weirdly so, while at the same time still being able to be affected by other aspects of it. Now, I haven't really tried this with any other nodes, but I noticed that when I turned it off, they all went away, and that they didn't interact with the distribution node at all. So that's some interesting things to consider. I'm going to give this guy kind of some hair with like a hairline here, like a widow's peak situation. Yeah. And if we're doing that, we might as well have it go back down over here, huh? So we're gonna have a thin back here just to save time on rendering and whatnot. So at this point, we have about 1,000 of these little guys, which is plenty. And I want to find out if no, I don't need an audio node. We're gonna try and add a random node and see how that behaves. It seems to do just fine. Let's go ahead and add. Let's say like 20 degrees on the y-axis. I suppose neither of these should be 360 degrees if they're going to be hair, so we'll go ahead and do that. So normally you'd want to have more than like one curve for this sort of thing, but in the interest of time, we're going to stick with that. Um, yeah, yeah. Let's just go with that for now. We'll talk about something else soon. But so what I'm going to show here is the baking to objects utility, and in this instance, we're going to take our instancer. We have no problems with translate, rotations, or parents. Everything's been frozen on the original object, so we're just going to bake it. And this could take some time since we do have about 1200 curves to bake into, but you can see it's already done, so it's pretty efficient. We're going to just select by hierarchy and then deselect instance or object. And from there, we're going to go to Arnold and get the curve collector. All this work has been to be able to render the curves quickly and efficiently. So we actually no longer need the hair mash network. However, you can see that if we turn off the placer, his hair goes away. So, you know, it's kind of its own little independent thing, and yet it's still being affected by any nodes that are above it. So if we were to like play with the scale, which clearly I should have, so we'd get a better render, you can do that. And it still works. You can still place your hair or whatever objects you want to place on there dynamically and with like a brush style effect. Anyway, so I just think that's really cool. So let's turn that off and unhide our curve collector. And I think we're gonna start with some settings in here. We're gonna make it some thick guys. Let's get this Arnold situation going so we can actually see what we're doing. Because nothing that we're doing actually affects the curves in the viewport. You have to see it through Arnold's eyes. Let's change the direction here. So that may be a little thick. So instead of that, we can bring it down to something like that. And again, our handy dandy ramps allow us to uh, thin this out a little bit, go from thick to thin in a much more quick succession. Yeah, you can see it's kind of grody when you apply hair like this, especially when you actually go and like add an Arnold hair shader, which you can then put with like an auburn hair color, and it really starts to look hairy. It's a little upsetting. But yeah, this is just a really quick way to place some hair in a very specific way. If you get a close crop of our little gentleman here. And we increase our samples as per usual, we can get a pretty interesting little effect. So that's an Arnold specific thing to rendering curves, but you could also do this in Mental Ray if you're so inclined by creating a set of those curves that we baked and applying some overrides to that. There are some tutorials elsewhere for that, and I haven't tested it yet, so I may try to do a tutorial on that if you guys are so inclined. Let me know in the doobly-doo below. What else was I going to go over? Yeah. Okay. So first things first, let's put this sky dome into its own channel so I don't keep freaking selecting it. And then we're going to hide this sphere, and we're going to hide our curve collection along with the instancer. Just so everything's there for, when the file is put out later. You guys can still see it and play with it and look at the settings, but we can move on. So I would like to introduce the Symmetry node as well. So let's get these two objects and create a mesh network. Symmesh. As per usual, distribute's doing its own thing. Let's get a bunch more here. And I think what might be fun is if we take a torus, scale it way up, and just lop off, big chunks of it, right? Yeah. And then if we lop off like the bottom section, we're left with this thing. So let's freeze transformations. Let's center the pivot, and we'll delete its history. Cool beans. Okay. From here, I think we're going to smooth it a bit, which will sort of... Yeah, that's good. All right. So, going over the same usual thing, we're going to make a mesh distribution type with vertexes, flooding the mesh using the torus. So now we have that. We no longer truly need the torus, which is a little mean to say, but here we are. Because when we go into our uh, symmetry dealios, it's not going to matter too much. We're focused on the mesh network. So immediately when you put on your symmetry node, you get a mirror plane on the x-axis. You can also make it a y-axis or a z-axis, which really does nothing in this case. And you can see how these are applied. You can also apparently do bounding box plus and negative. So if you want it to be kind of mirrored on top of itself like so, on any of the given axes, you can do that. Very handy, very handy. We're going to stick with the normal mirror plane, and we're going to complete it that way. If we don't allow rotations, however, we get this weird, like, this weird effect, you know. You may want that. It's sort of unnerving, but I am going to allow it to do that. And sometimes you'll need to allow negative scales. So if you've got this strange problem, probably especially when you're using a bounding box negative, I suspect you'll end up with some issues with that. But I think we're going to be okay. As usual, you can create a fall off object if you're so inclined. And for whatever reason, we seem to have lost... Oh, that's interesting. That is not how I expected it. Yeah, okay. So when you invert it, it works a little bit more as expected. So wherever this thing is affecting, it's going to, instead of being symmetrical, double up back into itself. So a little wild over there. So you can kind of see it on the sides here a little bit more visually. If we go up and down here, you can see it being slow, well, quickly being pushed back up into itself, negating the symmetrical effect. So just to show that off, you can do some really wild effects with fall-off objects or even with strength maps. So, the cool thing, of course, about this is that you can symmetry the entire thing again, and it's automatically a whole thing. So from there, all you have to do is play with distributions on this side of the affair. And as you work, it will slowly build out in all directions, kind of dynamically, which I think is very cool. Very cool. If you scatter it, it'll be symmetrically scattered in four directions, so that's pretty nifty, I think. But anywho, I just wanted to introduce that symmetry tab. It can lead to a lot of very cool compositions. And am I missing anything? I think we're good. Is there anything left in here I want to show off? Yeah, yeah. This is also a pretty good time. We're just going to be kind of introducing different nodes right now. I'm going to use a sphere as my kind of guiding stone here. And we are going to add an orient node that aims at the target, which I'm designating as this sphere in this box here. So whenever we up move this, all of the sphere's normals will be pointing towards it. So it's going to change the rotations. If we go in these directions, you see that it affects it that way as well. There's also something in your orient menu that allows you to orient to the mesh as well, but I have yet to find how this is different. So if you guys can tell me, leave a comment or email me, because I would like to know. For all intents and purposes, it seems that these two are practically identical, but aiming at target seems to be more efficient in my experience. You can also change the up vector if you've got something that is directionally biased, and tell it that you usually it's going to be on the z-axis that you want it. So anyway, and the fun, weird, cool thing is this can be your orient object, and it can also be your fall off object for symmetry. So if we were to go into symmetry 1, create a fall off object, go into it, change this to a mesh, go into the connections node, take our sphere that's currently being oriented to, invert the fall off, and then go over here, you can see that we would be able to start, if we expand this out a little bit, where is that going to affect it? What if we hide it? If we hide it, we can actually see that if you like overlap the oriented object over the actual objects, they all start to point in on themselves, which is pretty cool. Oop, oop, oop. Here we go. Okay, so it must be on this side. Oh, whoa, look at that. So when you have it over here, it's creating a hole over here for whatever reason. That is wild. This gets very confusing very quickly. What is affecting what in terms of a mesh network with, one object behaving as the orient for one node and behaving as a fall off object for another node. Um, but if you combine them in a very intentional way, you can end up with some very simple, powerful animating, like controlling objects. So, and by animating, I of course don't necessarily mean you have to animate it, but it does allow you to dynamically change a scene very, very quickly without having to position 100 objects. So, yeah. Instead of orient, let's say that we broke our connection with that fall off object and deleted it. And instead, we show our sphere again. We can go and apply an offset node, which is kind of super cool, but I struggle to find a use for it sometimes. Um, in this case, we're going to use P sphere 3 as the offset uh, closest point on mesh. And what this is going to do, it's a little more obvious when we take the strength down to 50%, so a 0.5 value there. It sort of tries to follow your object, and if you let it get close enough, it will actually attach itself to it. Like it's wild. This is such a cool little thing. It doesn't have to be closest point on mesh. It could be raycast, although I have no earthly idea what raycast does. If I'm being perfectly frank. You can lower clamp it, which does something. You can high clamp it instead, which also appears to do something. It's so trippy sometimes. And I am unfortunately unsure of what these all do, but uh, just kind of putting it out there that it's you can run this thing through your torus and have this bulgy shape and bring it along for the ride. And I don't know. I just wanted to introduce the fact that this offset node exists and that it attempts, it always attempts to use the translations of your target object to place your other object. It's kind of a strange little thing. Not gonna lie, but and then there's other options here that I don't fully understand. Like multiply doesn't seem to do anything. Overwrite again seems to do nothing. Multiply by time. I mean, it clearly does something, but what that something is, I could not tell you. So, again, this is one I could actually use some help with, but I would encourage you to try to find ways to incorporate offset into some other aspects of your Mash experience. So let's say, can we reuse this curve? which curve was this? This guy? Yeah. Let's just go ahead and duplicate him and scale him up. So let's say you've got some tall cubes. And you orient this upwards and you delete it. You do all the things, you freeze it, you delete its history. And then you create a mesh network. So this is going to be offset. No, I said I wouldn't do that. Cube mesh, just for this particular instance. Take this back down to 0, and we create our curve node. We take this guy, drag it over into the little guy here. And step to 1, animation speed to 0. Probably 1.1, honestly, just to get that last one to the very end. Dreaming of a white Christmas. And let's go back to our distribution, increase the number of points. I believe if we rotate our P cube 2, we can change its orientation. So we can point them all in, we can point them all out, which I think is the way I want to go with this. Yeah, so let's stick with that and go to another offset node where the cube here, which I believe is P cube 3, P sphere 3, my bad, acts as the input mesh. So if you low clamp it, some weird stuff happens again. I'm not sure what these numbers mean, you know? So low clamp of 1, 1, 1, high clamp of, so let's say like 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. Then we'll low clamp it. What if this is like 5, 5, 5? It seems to scale it for some reason. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. What's kind of funny is that offset behaves like an orient node if you disable position and rotation, or position and scaling. But if you disenable, if you turn off rotation, scaling doesn't seem to do much. Oh, if you put like a 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. No? So that leaves you with position, which sort of takes the curve as sort of a guideline and then orients it onto this object. It's a very strange mixture of translations and distributions that I highly encourage you to play with. So I had some effect going on at another point that I thought was actually pretty wild, but clearly I can't remember how to do it right now, and I apologize for that. So I'm not gonna have a render for the end of this one, unfortunately. I suppose we could turn on hair again. Nah, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's hide all this. Let's turn off that. Let's turn the hair back on. Grab our original sphere, make it visible. Take our curve collector, make him visible. And grab our render view. Make our thing visible. Bring this guy back out. Turn him back on. Get ourselves right up and close with the curly cues again. All right, let's take ourselves a render of that. And then we can talk a little bit about what we went over today. Make sure we've got those 4 samples. Nice. I think today we will increase the specular count just for some variety. And we'll move on. So we talked a little bit about some nodes that I'm less familiar with, which means I'm encouraging you guys so strongly. Last time I'll say it, I swear, to help me out with them. If you play around with them and you stumble upon some cool setting, email me with some of your findings. Or maybe take a screen cap of your settings that you think led to that. So I would love to learn just as much as you guys. At this point, there are so many things you can do with Mash with just that's a small set of nodes that I've shown that I think you guys will be just fine. But that's not to say that I discourage watching any more of these videos or sharing back with me some of your thoughts. It's just that with just these placement and transform based nodes, you can create scenes of such crazy complexity and like such density of detail that I mean it's just mind boggling. So I think next time we're gonna go over just some fun things with Mash, things that probably are a little advanced, and I'm not gonna be able to. Uh, I'll just be kind of making it up as I go along, honestly. So hope you have fun with that. But I believe today we went over the symmetry node, which I showed off being able to do very similar to a mirror duplication in Maya, but dynamic. So you've got your mirror plane that you have to choose. You have a positive or negative direction therein that you can apply, and as always, you can apply fall off objects or anything else that you like. What else did we do? We did curve collections, staring me right in the face, that allow you to render curves in Arnold very simply and efficiently. We also went over very briefly and tangentially the hair shader. I showed you how to put a preset on. Nothing too big. And we also talked about the placer node. Well, these guys. And we placed some stuff on some guy's head. A sphere, but you know, you can let your imagination run wild. If you guys want to see any more of these techniques specifically in more depth, such as the curve collector, the hair shader, playing with curve collector settings like over here, just go ahead and let me know. I can do more tutorial on that, but I just want to know where everyone's interest is at. So I think that's gonna do it for this episode. So thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.